And today's challenge is a 2015 Polaris Ranger 570 EFI, although this is going to apply to a whole bunch of different vehicles. Alright, the problem is the fuel gauge. There's two problems with it actually. Number one, I don't have anywhere near that much gas in here, and this is the only reading I ever get. So clearly the gauge is bad. I know that because I have taken the readings. Don't just assume. It's probably the sender whenever it sends you the wrong level, but in this case it is actually the cluster. The second thing about this particular fuel gauge is it's almost invisible. You really don't notice it. The first time you really notice it is when the engine starts sputtering and you're about 10 miles out on a trail and you realize you're out of gas. So let's fix that. I've got a solution for either the semi-invisible or the non-functional gas gauge that's easy, cheap, and a big improvement. So first, let's talk a little bit about how we determine whether the problem's up here in the gauge or back in the fuel tank. It's real simple. Just follow me back. Pardon my dust, but here's the fuel tank, the sending unit, and it's as simple as popping this off. What you've just done is you've disconnected the sending unit, so the resistance that is being sent by this open wire is infinite. Now the gauge thinks that 6 ohms from this sending unit is full and 90 ohms is fully empty. So it's 6 to 90 ohms is the spec. And so I've gone well over 90 ohms, so if we walk around and look at the gauge, we should see totally empty, but as you can see, it's still showing exactly the same. Well, it's actually gone down a couple notches, but it's clearly not right. It's still giving me 3/4 of a tank when it should be fully empty. So we know the problem is not the sending unit, it's the cluster itself. And I already looked into replacing this. It's like $400 for a new one. You can get a used one, but in that case, it's going to come with whatever mileage the used vehicle had, and it's going to be a lot more than 915, folks. So I'm looking for a third alternative, and that is a new, better, more visible fuel gauge. Okay, so let's see what we got. Here's the new gauge, and it's, as you can see, it's simple. It's a digital gauge. You can get analog gauges that are still in the under $20 category, so if you prefer that style, that's great. I like this one because all these increments are green except the bottom couple are red, so even a guy who gets distracted like me is going to notice when it starts flashing red when I'm almost out of fuel. Comes with a little tiny instruction sheet, but the important thing is this particular one is set up for various resistance ranges, and you can see there's one that's 98 to 8 ohms, which is pretty darn close. I don't think we're going to get any closer than that. There's another one that's 0 to 90, so we got a couple, and then a couple way out in the weeds that are much higher resistance, so I'm going to ignore those. I'm going to go for the 8 ohms full, 98 ohms empty, which should work just fine in my buggy. So the good thing is in this one, I don't have to do any modifications because you cut these wires in the harness to adjust to one of these different resistance ranges. So I won't get real specific because it may be different from the ones you get, but just make sure you get a unit that reads in the range of 6 or 8 ohms to 90 to 100 ohms, and it should work just fine. So we got to find a place to put this next. Okay, quick look at the dash tells me there's room here, but let's take a look behind the dash and see if both of them will work out or not. All right, the short story, basically, I think either one would probably work. This one's got a little bit of a contour to it. Looks like it might be a little more difficult to get to. This side is pretty much wide open. I don't think I'm going to have any trouble at all reaching that, getting to it. It's contoured lightly on both sides, so even if I don't quite get it dead center, it shouldn't really cause a problem. So let's put it there. Luckily, the nice folks at Polaris put an height adjustment on the steering wheel column, so you actually have room to drill this hole. How cool is that? Okay, as this kind of thing goes, this is not really rocket science because I can sight around my 2-inch hole saw and make sure everything is centered in between the two tilted bezels on the edge, and little room from the top to make room for the bezel on there. And then the moment of truth, you pull the trigger. And there you have it, folks, a beautiful 2-inch hole. Okay, that actually fits in there just fine. It's not going down quite flush because these angled, beveled edges here are just big enough to catch the edges of the bevel here. So I think I'll just go ahead and take just a little material off both sides. You wouldn't have to do that. I'm being anal, but hey, you want to see it done right, but you don't have to yourself. Okay, not a show card job, but it's in there and it's flush. Now it's time to install the hardware on the back to hold it in place. Okay, we install this little bridge clamp so that it goes across the two screws. Once you got them lined up, crank them down tight. That's what's going to hold this thing in through all the rough trails you're on. Now all that remains is wiring. Okay, now we need to find a 12-volt source, so I'm going to turn the ignition on, and I'm going to go to ground over here just on a bolt, and I believe this is probably hot, and sure enough, there's my 12 volts, so I got an easy 12-volt ground, so I'm ready to hook it up. The other wires go to ground and to the signal off of the sending unit. Alright, pulling the wire off the gauge cluster is as easy as pushing down that tab and pulling it off. You just need to open up this little dust cover on the back, and you got easy access to all the wires there. Now I know from looking online that the wires I'm looking for are brown and the purple white. So that's number 4 it's number 4 from this end over here and number 3 from this end over here. So let's take a reading across that and see what it tells us. Okay, we're going to hook up between the 3rd pin there and the 4th pin here, and we should get a reading directly from the sending unit. And I'm getting 28 ohms, which sounds about right. That's kind of probably half full, give or take. And that's also important because that allows you to verify that yes, the problem is with the cluster, because 28 ohms should be reading in the middle of the gauge. Okay, now one of the assumptions that the gauge manufacturer is making is that one of these lines coming up from the sending unit is ground. So I'm going to choose the brown line since that's more commonly used as a ground color, and I'm going to measure from the brown wire to ground. And that gives me 0 ohms. So the brown wire is well and truly ground. That means the purple and white wire is going to be your signal to your fuel gauge. Okay, I'm going to cut at a point where it's going to be outside of the housing. And then I'm going to strip back. And I'm just using wire cutters instead of my wire strippers, because this probably is more likely what you have laying around, but just be careful. This really isn't hard to do at all. Now, a lot of times, and I'd say normally, I use heat shrink and solder to do connections like this, but I'm not really worried about this. This is a low current, non-critical application, so should work out just fine. So I've connected the wire from the wiring harness going back to the sending unit to the yellow wire, and we'll leave the other side of the wire going into the cluster disconnected because it will affect the reading you're getting on your gauge. So let's go ahead and get the rest of them connected. Alright, I'm going to put the original harness cover over there, put a little bit of good quality black tape around the whole thing. Now all that remains is this pesky red wire, which is actually an orange wire. Go figure. In this case, we just need to connect it to this handily available lug there. So let's just crimp on the appropriate lug for that. Okay, now one thing I like to do whenever I'm working with itty bitty tiny little wires like this is to actually bend over the conductor if the crimp will handle it, and that just fits inside here, so it gives me a little better mechanical grab. So basically this crimp is actually going to be grabbing not only the wire but the insulation as well. I'm not worried about the amount of current that has to go through here because it's almost zero. But that will just make the whole connection just a little bit stronger. Also, in my kit, the red indicates the smaller, tiny little wires, but you have different size lugs, so you want to test fit your lug to make sure it's actually gonna fit on the post. Otherwise, you'll be doing it again. Okay, standard 8mm nut on this post to hook up the positive cable. Okay, now I just need to hook up the original plug to my cluster and then route the new plug, and I'm going to give it a few twists just to help keep things from getting loose. And I'm just going to plug it in to my gauge. And it should only go in one way, folks, so there it is. Second chance is good. Okay, folks, moment of truth time. I took the protective wrap off. That looks a lot better. Let's see what kind of reading we're getting on our fuel gauge. I'll turn the ignition on, and oh my, there we go. Look at that. We are getting a 2/3 full, which sounds about right. That's about, rough terms, about 30 ohms, which is 2/3 and 90 ohms, or 1/3 of 90 ohms. So that would be exactly the right reading. You can see that my poor disconnected gauge over here is telling me exactly the same thing it was before I disconnected it. So it's well and truly no good. All right, folks, I ended up retaking this scene to show you how good this gauge looks, because it didn't come out very crisp and clean on the original because of the lighting. I can tell you it probably looks better than it does even now on this video. Very sharp, clear, obvious as to where your fuel actually is, as opposed to going over here and trying to decipher this nearly invisible line across the top, which doesn't work on this one anyway. So I'd say that was a major improvement, upgrade for all of 11 bucks and probably half an hour fiddling with it. So I'd say that's a major win, guys.